So without further ado, let's get to Sam Lansing. This is Advanced Features of Nagios XI.
Alrighty, so let's go ahead and get started here. As you just mentioned, I'm Sam Lansing. And if you guys have any questions that I can't cover today or we don't have time to, I do have my email address down here at the bottom. That's my direct company email address. Feel free to email me there. That's also going to be available because these slides will be up after the conference for you to make use of. All right, so just a little bit introduction and agenda here. So this presentation is going to cover essentially how to use some of the more advanced or lesser known features of Nagios XI, things such as the bulk management tools, auto discovery, advanced reporting features, as well as how to build your own useful dashboard out of a number of different dashlets that are, you'll find them probably commonly throughout the interface, but you might not have made much use of them yet. And some best practices as well that I like to mention that I use in my own XI servers. So just a tiny bit about myself here. I know we don't have a ton of time. I've got a lot of slides to go through. I'm a support tech at Nagios Enterprises. That means I deal with the forums, I deal with the ticketing system, phone calls, quick starts, remote sessions, everything in between, and a little bit of consulting with consulting clients as well. Known as the good cop on the forums, that's my little moniker. S. Lansing on the forums if you haven't noticed that already with my name. I do a smidge of development, just a tiny bit here and there. It's mostly just PHP stuff with our wizards and just the web front end, things like that. Just some basic fixes and some shell scripting too. That's not anything to be super proud of though. And I've been with Nagios for about 2.5 years now. I actually had my 2-year anniversary about 3 weeks ago or so. Or no, that would have been 3 weeks ago. My time's off, but about 2.5 years. All right, so advanced features, why should you really care about them? So I'm sure most of you have either Nagios core systems and you're interested in XI, or you got XI servers right now, and everything might be running perfectly fine. It might not be, but if it is, I mean, why should you really care about all these advanced things if it's working fine already? So my primary goal with this is to show you some tools that are going to help cut down on the amount of time you spend configuring and behind the system and just getting you back to the actual heart of monitoring, you know. Taking care of your alerts, watching all your environment, instead of just sitting there configuring everything, which can take quite a bit of time. The first thing I do want to mention here that a lot of people actually don't make use of, if you do, awesome. I just want to make a really basic mention of host groups and service groups. It's a great tool for grouping alike hosts or services together. I'll use it, for instance, to create groups for my Linux servers, my Windows servers, and everything in between, even printers. And what that allows me to do is there's a number of pages in XI, such as the host group overview page, where you can actually see a list of all of your groups all together. And that means you don't have to view the service details page or the host details page where you've got a whole list of stuff. You can actually kind of get a more top-level view and then see the general health of those entire groups of systems at once. A new feature that has been built into Nagios XI 2014 is Deadpool. This is something I like to mention a lot because I know as cloud environments get bigger and larger and it comes more into the forefront, a lot of people have to monitor their cloud environments. It's a tool that allows you to essentially automate the removal of old hosts and services. Excuse me. So as an example here, now you can find this under the admin menu in Nagios XI, or excuse me, under configure and then Deadpool. It's really dead simple to set up. That wasn't a play on Deadpool, but essentially, you've got your first page here where you just enable the processor itself. You do have the option to remove performance data files. That's one thing I do want to mention too. If you're not yet aware, when you delete hosts and services with Nagios XI, it doesn't remove your RRD files, which are used for creating your graphs. Those can take up extra space on your drives, of course. So the reason we don't do that is because we don't know, we're not going to make assumptions for you guys. You may set that same host name up again or the same service name under that host, and you might want that historical data there. But this will allow you to remove that, so it completely removes all records of those systems to set, besides your reporting. You'll get an email to an email address, and you can do a comment there and add another one in, just letting you know that a host or service is being added to the list. Just briefly here, I'm going to go over it really quick. So you've got 2 stages. It's pretty simple. Stage 1 is the amount of time that a host, in this case, it's the exact same options for your services. The amount of time the host must be in a down state, or a problem state rather, before it's added to the Deadpool list. Now that's automatically going to disable alerts, so you're not spammed for hosts. For instance, if you're monitoring lots of cloud systems and they're coming up and going down and coming up again with different host names, you would be getting alerts for all those down hosts that you no longer are monitoring. So that will disable your alerts for you. Now, the next option here is the deletion time. So that's the amount of time it must be in that state before it's automatically removed. Now, with great power comes great responsibility. This will completely remove that configuration file. So unless you're keeping good backups or snapshots and you want to be able to revert back to it, you won't be able to do that again without creating, or you won't be able to see that host or service again without creating it manually. And with that, of course, we do have exclusion filters, so you can do regex matching in there as well, just in case you've got systems that may be down for a period of time, maybe moving them from state to state or country to country, and that won't remove them automatically then. Here goes the cap. Another tool we actually just built in with 2014 is the Birdseye view. This is another one of our views that we kind of term as sort of a knock center view, or a large overhead LCD screen view. It's an alternative to using things like the tactical overview. So essentially what we've got here is we've got a list of all of our hosts, these selections here with the actual names. These are all the host names themselves. And then down below that, you've got the individual services that are in a non-OK state on that host. And then around here, you've got a different color. For instance, this is green. This is red up here. That's showing the state of the host itself. So it's kind of a quick way to see or gauge where your hosts are right now, as well as the services that are in a problem state below it: critical, warning, unknown, etc. And then on the left-hand, or the right-hand side, excuse me, you've got sort of almost an RSS feed for your alerts. So this is going to update every time a new alert occurs in your environment, and it's going to keep scrolling it. And this will actually shift while you're watching it, and it'll shift. It'll kind of filter the issue systems up to the top, the ones that are in a non-OK state, towards the top. So once again, just another way to sort of view your environment as issues occur and kind of get a good gauge of how the general health is looking. Nagios is another excellent tool. It's great to dive in and use. Essentially, it allows you to take any image you want, such as a JPEG or a PNG image, and plot your hosts on it in sort of a map-like fashion. In this example here, we've got a server room. This is not ours at Nagios. Ours is a little bit prettier than that, but, well, that's up to debate. But in this case, we've got a number of different blades, right? So on here, we've actually plotted our hosts, so we can see where each individual host is in real life, what server it's on, what system it's on. So as an example here, just a really basic one, you can take a look at this map, see where your hosts are down. You can run down the hallway, swap your KVM right over to it, and get plugging away at the problem. Just once again, a really basic use case. And it's a lot more flexible than just putting hosts on a map. You can do tons of inner configuration there. There's a lot of good documentation on the Nagios site. It's a third-party component that we've built into Nagios XI. Just another example of a map here. This one could be used, for instance, by an ISP. You've got your cable modems as an example here on these different houses. And you can actually view, in this case, where your parent-child relationships are, which I'll talk about here in just a few moments, between each individual system. So this way you could get on the horn to your cable guy that's out there trying to fix the issues and let him know which house is down, just by having the address of the host itself in Nagios and mapped onto Nagios. Another one here, of course, just a map of a country, once again showing you where your systems are in sort of a geographical overview. So moving on from Nagios to recurring downtime, how many of you use downtime in your environments with Nagios right now? That's good. I'm glad. A lot of people don't use downtime. Just briefly, downtime is a really good way to suppress alerts from occurring on systems that are down for patching or in administrative downtime, etc. It allows you through Nagios to tell Nagios that, hey, we know this system's down. You don't need to tell us about it. You don't need to bug us about it during this period of time. Recurring downtime with XI allows you to set this up once for one host. And as an example here, we've got a Windows server. This is Scott Wilkerson's box at our office. It's down for patching again. And just a really basic example here, we can see the ones that we've already got set up. And on the next page here, this allows us to essentially say, with recurring downtime, that every Friday at 6 p.m., we're going to be in downtime for 2 hours for this host. So that tells Nagios at 6 p.m., 6 to 8 p.m., we're going to suppress alerts from going out for this host because it's down for patching. It happens to be a Windows server, Microsoft loves to put patches out, so we bring that one down every Friday for updates. So it's a basic example there. You can also include all the services as well. That's something you can do with downtime. It takes a little bit more work. With recurrent downtime, it's really just a one-click there, and you can include all the sub-services underneath it as well, because your systems will be checked while they're in downtime. But it's, once again, a great tool for suppressing alerts for going out. Actually, tying into that, I'm going to go back really quick and talk about one thing that just popped into my head. With 2014 XI as well, we've built into a number of our reports an advanced button that you can click on, and that allows you to do a number of things. One is you can show all the performance graphs for that host and all of its services on that same report. So for instance, the availability report and the availability summary, you can view all the performance graphs for that option now and then export as a PDF file. But you can also tell it to hide periods of downtime. And that's really important because before having that in there, the reports wouldn't account for downtime. So for instance, if you're doing heavy SLA checking or you have to hit targets, it would not include the downtime that you had to have the host in. So it would essentially not be the 100% true data, but you can now account for downtime in those reports. Just a quick mention there. Yeah, another tool here that I make pretty heavy use of is the Hypermap. This is under the home page of Nagios XI. This is a really good way of getting sort of a top-down view of your parent and child relationships in Nagios. And that's what I really want to talk about here is parent-child relationships. It's a really good way to, I guess, sort of eliminate false negatives in your environment. So as an example here, we've got our Nagios XI server, and then we've got a number of different hosts here. But what you can see is between our XI server here and, for instance, this host up here, we've got this guy in between. So what we're saying is this is the parent to this child host. Now, if you're in a typical network downtime or down network scenario, if this, for instance, this switch here goes down and there's no redundant route, you don't have any routes to go around here, and you can't talk to this system, it's going to go into a critical state in Nagios, or a down state rather, and you're going to start getting alerts for it. Even if this system isn't down, it's just because you can't talk to it with your ping checks. By setting this up as a parent for these different child hosts, these are going to swap into a unreachable state rather than a down state if this one goes critical, because we really don't know if it's up or down. We just know we can't talk to it. It's just an unreachable device on our network. So that's kind of how you eliminate some of those false negatives. I know it's caused a lot of headaches for people in the past, having a switch or a firewall go down and then you start getting critical alerts for everything behind it. This is a good way to kind of do away with that. And then, of course, when you set up your unreachable or unknown alerts on your individual hosts and services, you can set them up to alert differently, based on, for instance, I'll set up separate alerting methods for my contacts for my unknown and unreachable alerts. For instance, I will not put them in my escalations because in most cases when systems are down in my environment for that reason in an unreachable state, I don't really pay attention to the alerts too often, simply because I've got them mostly in parent-child relationships. So schedule backups and local backups. This is another really good tool. This is under the admin menu in Nagios XI. Essentially, this allows you to make local FTP or SSH backups of your XI server. So you can set this up in, once again, a recurring fashion, so you don't have to manually go to the CLI anymore and make your backups yourself. For XI, you can do this directly from the web interface. So just a basic example here, we've got a weekly backup, and this is every Sunday at, looks like midnight. And it's going to go right into our temp directory. One thing I did want to make sure to point out here is the backup limit. In this case, we've only got 4 set for this. So what that means is after 4 backups are made in the temp directory for XI, if another one is made, it's going to remove the first one that was created, the one with the earliest date. So make sure you either enter 0 here to keep it unlimited, or give yourself a good amount of leeway there, otherwise you're going to start missing your backups mysteriously. I think I've got another shot here of the SSH or FTP options. Yes, FTP, all right. So just a basic FTP connection, think FileZilla or something like that. Just like setting up a local backup, you just give it the FTP server address, port, you want to have a username and password. Of course, that username and password has to be able to write to the proper directory you're giving it here. Otherwise, you won't have any backups there. And then you can also use encryption, SSL encryption there, just in case you have to transfer it over the wire out of your network. So the snapshotting tool in Nagios XI, this is kind of not a very oftenly talked about feature. Essentially, you guys, I'm sure, have all applied configuration in Nagios XI, right, in the core configuration manager or after you run a wizard. Essentially, what Nagios is doing, is it's writing out the configuration files, and then it's also adding it to the MySQL database on the back end after it verifies it. So every time you apply configuration, Nagios creates a snapshot tarball. And that's essentially a snapshot of your current running configuration when it ran that apply configuration. So you can always revert back to that now with 2014. So here we've got a list of our snapshots. You can find this under the admin menu and also in the core configuration manager itself. But what's different here, and I did want to point this out specifically this year after 2014 released, is you can now archive these snapshots. So Nagios itself or Nagios XI rather, will only keep a certain amount of snapshots at one time, much like the FTP or SSH backups. It'll start removing the first one in that list. So what I typically do with this now is I'll make snapshot archives of milestone configurations, say every 3 months, every 6 months or so, just to keep a good backup for myself in case I have to revert back or in case somebody goes haywire in my environment and deletes everything. So just a couple options with that. Of course, you can rename it. You can actually save that tarball itself and open it up and take a look at it, which is something you can do with our profile component, which I'll show a few slides, I think, in the up ahead here. And then I'll also show you the verification. So, of course, Nagios, you have to run a verification to make sure your config files are all okay. Otherwise, Nagios won't be able to restart. And that is also held there in the snapshot as well. One more tool here. This one, the SSH Terminal. This is also under the admin menu in Nagios XI. It's the AJAX term. It's a great way to sort of circumvent having to use PuTTY or something like that, even though I personally love using PuTTY. But this allows you to essentially SSH into your XI server or into another server right from the XI server's front end itself in your browser. The only thing I want to point out here is you need to have a browser extension that allows you to SSH from the browser as well. I did have a couple examples of Fire SSH is one of them that you can install in Chrome or Firefox. I think it's actually just Firefox. But it's a great alternative to having to go back to PuTTY and then set up your SSH session in Nagios XI. Okay, so the system profile. This is a really important one that I wanted to mention. As a part of the tech team, we use a system profile component here all the time. If you guys have had a ticket with us in the last year, I'd say, we've probably asked you for your system profile at one time or another. This is actually something that I wrote up about a year ago or so now. The profile itself, this is how it always used to look. This is just one page under the admin menu. It's going to show you some basic system statistics, your PHP and your system time, etc. The major thing I wanted to point out here is the download profile button on the top right. Now what that does, as we go to the next page here, what that does is it gives you a zip file, and inside of that zip file, it's got a number of log files here. These are all the current log files from the system. When you click that download button, it's actually going to run I believe it's a tail dash 100, so 100 lines tail of these logs. So we use this all the time to get information about your system that revolves around the issues that are occurring. So you've got things such as your perf data logs, your MPCD logs, your Nagios log, event managers and other and command subsets are used with Nagios XI a lot. And inside of that as well, you get your configuration snapshot, that current configuration snapshot. So this is something I'd encourage you guys all to check out when you get a chance. It's great for troubleshooting even yourselves personally if you run into issues in Nagios XI or on the system itself. The XI backend API is another tool I wanted to mention. This is essentially with Nagios XI, so you've got access to a backend API here it's essentially XML output. So with this, you get, based on what user you're logged in as, in this case, the Nagios admin, we've got a backend ticket here. You probably can't read it from where you're at. But this is essentially your key into the API. Now what this allows you to do is actually take that URL to these specific things, such as your contact information, your current hosts and services, and tie that into your own systems that may not be on your XI server. So maybe you've got a centralized server, web server out there someplace that's responsible for creating dashboards for your managers or for different users in your environment, your help desk team, etc. And you can pull all the information that you'd be seeing in Nagios XI and essentially rebuild it on another system with that backend XML API. So as an example here, a couple screenshots. I'm sorry if it's a little bit hard to read with that font. Here we've got service status list. So this is the current status of your services in the XML format. We've got a lot of really granular information here. The last check time, an OK state or a warning. You've got your just status text from the actual plugin check itself. Things such as a display name, et cetera. And you can all pull this in, and then, if you have ever dealt with parsing XML, you can pull this in and essentially create your own dashboards on different web pages. And you can also use this with your own dashboards or components, even wizards in Nagios XI if you start to create them yourselves. So deploying dashboards, this is straight from the dashboard page itself with Nagios XI. This allows you to, once you've created dashboards in your environment, deploy them out to multiple different users at one time. So what I'll do here is, for instance, I like all my users, it's my read-only users, to have the same home page because I want them to be responsible for the general system health itself. So I'll have a homepage dashboard set up with just my service status dashlet itself and then some graphs that revolve around some of the top systems in that environment that they're responsible for. So once I create that here, I'll just tick the Deploy Dashboard button. And I'll also keep it synced. So that's going to sync it with the Nagios admin, in this case, the Nagios admin's homepage dashboard. So when they start deleting dashlets and saying, hey, I didn't know about that problem because I don't have a dashlet for it, you can say, well, hey, it's synced with mine. It's going to be reset to mine every time. And this is also going to take effect as well if you make changes as the admin user that created that dashboard and sent it out, deployed it. When you make changes to that dashboard, it'll also broadcast out to them as well. So you can update it for different situations. Auto discovery. This is found right under the configuration menu in Nagios XI. This one I particularly wanted to talk about for two reasons. One is a lot of people use it kind of as the end-all be-all for monitoring, which I don't agree with, and I'll show why in just a moment here. The other reason is I like using this quite often when I try to monitor new systems in my environment. So essentially, auto discovery itself runs an Nmap scan from the Nagios server to a certain network segment in your environment. You can set it up to scan. For instance, here we got 192.168.1.0/24, and it'll scan that entire tree. And if we go to the next one here, it's going to come up with a list of every server or every system, every address that it can talk to, as well as a number of the common port types that are open on that system itself. So what I've got here is I've enabled OS detection on the Nmap scan, or the auto discovery that I ran. And it's pulling in, for instance, two different Windows servers here. One's Windows Vista, and one is Windows 2008. I don't want to monitor Windows Vista because I don't like dealing with it anyways. But here we've got one of our hosts. So the reason why a lot of people use this as an end-all be-all is it's really easy to just run it once a week, twice a week, etc., and just keep configuring all your hosts through that. But the problem is you're just doing ping checks for these hosts, and you're just checking to see if these TCP ports are open. And that's not what I like to monitor. I like to get the actual system health, the hardware, the software that's running in that environment, such as ActiveMQ statistics, etc. So what I'll do is I'll run this like once a week or so at the beginning of the week. And then at the end, when I've got some free time, I'll take a look at this list. And then I'll pick out a certain number of hosts. And since I ran OS detection, I already know what they are. When I check these, on the bottom of the page, you can click Next, and it's just like a standard wizard that you set up. It's going to ask you for your host, or for your contacts, contact groups, the check interval, all that basic stuff. Steps 4, 5, and 6 of every wizard are the exact same. Just make sure you got the basics. And then you just basically configure them that way. But now that I know what devices, what actual operating systems are on them, I'll go back and I'll run one of our wizards against that system. So I'll be running, for instance, the Windows Server wizard against this Windows 2008 server. And that's just something I like to do because it's, for one, it makes it so I know which systems are new in my environment. As you can see, the mouse is going to show up. There we go. As you can see here, it ran that scan, and it checked with Nagios, and it said, hey, we don't already have this host in here, so we'll label it as new. So I already know which ones that I can configure that aren't already set up in my environment. So CCM, Core Configuration Manager, this is kind of an advanced feature and also kind of one of the main attractions of Nagios XI itself. So it was a little bit difficult. Should I add it in or not add it in? It's just one slide. Unfortunately, I couldn't RDP into my system at work earlier and get some more screenshots and add some more slides. If you're not familiar with the Core Configuration Manager, essentially this is a window into the MySQL database that runs on the back of Nagios XI. So when you set up your hosts and services through wizards, they're added to the MySQL database. And you're also able to view them here. So for instance, we've got our hosts, services, host groups, contacts. Everything that would be a typical flat configuration file with Nagios Core that you've added in Nagios XI should be here in your MySQL database. And this allows you to quite easily make alterations to your configuration files rather than having to go SSH to the backend and manually edit all those flat config files. It's quite a lot easier with CCM because you get a lot of drop-downs, you get a lot of radio dials, some simple text fields, and as well as that you get some documentation on the page. If you haven't noticed it, there is a drop-down on the top right of every CCM page that shows you all the different options, and it explains what check interval is and what your contact groups are, etc. Unfortunately, like I said, I don't have any additional screenshots on that. But if you guys have any questions, I'll try to remote in afterwards here and show you guys around if you've got any questions on the CCM. One thing that I did want to mention too, somebody mentioned to me that Troy Lee just had his VMA talk. And in his talk, he was talking about adding all your, I think it's check by SSH stuff in the flat config files. That's something you can do through the CCM. So you don't have to manually do all the stuff he showed you there. You can do it, well, it would be manually, but it's quite a bit easier through the CCM unless you've got like a custom scripted solution for your config files. Within the CCM is the Write Config Files tool. This is something a lot of people don't use because it's all the way on the bottom under the Tools menu. But we use this a lot on the support side for checking your environment for configuration errors. For instance, if somebody comes to us and says, hey, we apply configuration, but it's failing. It's saying there's configuration errors. This is where you want to go to check and see what those errors are. So under the Tools menu in the Core Configuration Manager, you can click Write and then Verify. And that's going to write out your current configurations, even the ones that you've altered that are failing, and it's going to verify them, and it's going to show you what the individual errors are that are causing Nagios to not restart properly. So as an example here, we've got this main error here, which is service has no hosts and or service description in the configuration file. Now it's going to show you exactly what service it's talking about here. In this case, I had just copied one and made an alteration to cause it to fail manually. But also show what line that starts on. So for instance, if you've got a lot of services under one host in Nagios XI, since they're all under one configuration file, it is also useful to SSH onto the XI server itself and take a look at that flat config file at that directory right there. But that'll show you where to start looking. So line 16, I would say that's probably the start of a new service, and that's probably where the issue is occurring. Unfortunately, I don't have any more detailed errors on this here, but that's something I always recommend. If you're having configuration issues, go here and take a look at it. You can also see that through the snapshot tool, because if I can't go back quite. The snapshot tool essentially will show you, if you notice on that one page we were on talking about the archiving, it's got a number of red snapshots as well. Those are showing up there because when you ran the apply config at that time, they came back as configuration errors on those snapshots. And within that snapshot, you can actually see where the errors were, and it's going to show it essentially the same as it does here. All right, so we've only got 10 minutes left. I have got a lot more slides to go through, so I'll try to go through the important ones here. Escalations, another extremely useful tool. This is also under the configuration menu in the Core Configuration Manager. This allows you to essentially escalate through multiple different contacts or contact groups for different alerts in Nagios. So I was attempting to, I don't know if Brian's in here, I was attempting to explain it earlier. It can get a little bit difficult to explain, but as an example, let's say you've got a host that's got the Nagios admin on it as a contact. So you're getting alerted for that host. So I've selected the escalation wizard here. And these three hosts, let's just say it's the Nagios admin on it by default, so that's who's typically going to get alerted for it. And then down below here, I've also selected a host group. So I've got my host selected for this escalation that we're setting up. On the next page here, What I'm doing is I've got a number of options here. So I've got my first notification, my last notification, and my interval. Of course, notification interval is in minutes, so every 5 minutes we're going to get a new notification sent from Nagios if it's still in a troubled state or in a state that's causing alerts in your environment. But what I'm saying here is, so the Nagios admin was getting alerted previously, right? He or she is who is getting alerted right now. On the third alert that goes out from that host, we are going to switch from notifying just the Nagios admin was a bad example because we're also alerting there. So on the third notification here, we're going to switch from using that standard contact that we had on the server or the host itself to using this notification escalation. So it's going to stop notifying that one contact, and it's going to start notifying the Nagios admin as well as the admin's contact group itself. Now, on the fourth one, so the third and the fourth, or the third notification, then on the next one, the fourth one here, that's our last notification, individual notification for this escalation, and then it'll move on to the next one. See, it gets really confusing. I confuse myself when I talk about it. If you've got questions about escalations, if you talk to me afterwards, I could probably explain it a little bit better. But it's essentially a way for you to set up tiered notifications, I guess. So let's say your basic net admin is going to be alerted for the first issue that occurs, and then if that problem is still occurring by the third notification, it's going to start notifying somebody higher up in the chain, if that makes a little more sense. And then you can notify somebody even higher, and you can just create as many escalations as you want to, but essentially you're changing who's responsible for the issue, who's receiving the alerts, if it's not being taken care of. One more thing I wanted to mention here, we've barely got enough time, is exclusion periods. So time period exclusions are also a little bit confusing. So essentially in Nagios XI, when you set up time periods, you can use them for things such as your reports, your notification time periods for your contacts, so when they're going to actually start receiving alerts throughout the week or days. What you can do here is when you click on, in the core configuration manager under time periods, when you click on manage exclusions, you can actually pick out a period that you've already defined. So for instance, we've got read-only notification times there. That doesn't necessarily matter. But what's important is when you add this into an already existing time period, whatever times are defined in that exclusion there will then be set apart from these individual time ranges. So for instance, here we've got Saturday, let's say that's a full 24-hour time range there. If that exclusion there was maybe between 6 a.m. to 12 a.m., and you add that in, that would essentially say between midnight and 6 a.m., this time period is in effect, and then between 12 p.m. or whenever this exclusion period ends to the 24th hour, so the next midnight essentially, or the coming day, then it'll be in effect once again. So you can kind of carve out times in your time period, within your time periods, to exclude whatever you've got this time period defined on. So for instance, your escalations or your notification times for different contacts, groups, check period times, etc. Let's see if I can blaze through a few more of these slides here. Bulk host clone tool. This is actually a wizard under the wizard section in Nagios XI. It allows you to pick out any host that you want and essentially copy all of its services over to a brand new host. So let's say you set up one of your Windows servers, right, or a Linux server, and you like how it's all set up. You're essentially setting up the exact same agent on the next server, but you don't want to have to manually add in all those checks again or make all those individual changes that you made on the first one. That's all perfect, but you don't want to manually do it all over again. This will allow you to clone the exact same configurations from those services or from that host to a new one. And it's quite simple, actually, how you add in an additional host down here. So we've got our address in field 1, and these are actually set to none by default, these extra fields, or ignore rather. However, it gives you the option to change, in addition to your address, your name, things like your parent host, etc. And you can just leave it as address as you want, if you want, rather, sorry. Talking a little bit too fast for myself. Essentially here, so we've got this swilkerson.nagios.local, and it's just a host that does WMI checks on this Windows server. We're cloning that one out to 192.168.4.23, and it's going to take all these services that we've ticked here, and it's going to copy them over. So it's a really good and fast way for you to duplicate or replicate your service checks onto multiple different hosts. The bulk modifications tool, this is also a really useful feature. We don't have quite as many options in here as we had hoped to by this time. However, we are constantly trying to build in more features to allow you to bulk change things on your hosts and services or your contacts, etc. This is under, I'll just check on what menu that's under exactly. But essentially, it allows you to change things such as even just a single configuration option. So let's say you want to change your check retry interval on all of your printers. All you need to do is come in here and click Change Single Config option. Then it brings you over to this page, and from this dropdown, you can select the individual configuration option you want to change. In this case, it's a retry interval. And it'll bring you to the next page, which I believe I've got a screenshot of here. Perfect. And it allows us to select hosts or services, and just like the new CCM, not the old one, the new one, where you can select, just kind of shift select through all your hosts or services. You can choose all the hosts that we want to change in bulk. And then as an example here, we're changing it all to a retry interval of 5. And it's just a simple integer value there. But of course, retry intervals are in minutes. And that's just the check retry interval for those individual hosts. And you can do that for services as well. Let's see what I've got down there. Yeah, the bottom image there, for instance, we're changing, we're adding a new template to services, or a template to use for new services, rather. So you can select your list of templates and apply them to multiple services at once. I've only got 2 minutes left. This goes way too fast. Config importing, I'll talk about this briefly. It's very useful, for instance, if you're using Nagios Core right now and you want to try out XI or you're still migrating. If you haven't made use of it yet, we have 2 documents on our library. One is prepping your config files for importing, and the other is actually importing them. It's all done through the CCM, except for the prep script. There's a script that runs on the back end that you can run against your configuration files from Core. It does need to make some changes to your configuration files because XI looks at them a little bit differently than Core does. So with Core, you can make a really messy configuration file. You can put everything in one huge config file if you want to. That's not how we do it with XI. It's a little bit cleaner. So it's going to do things such as instead of having your host and all of its services maybe in one config file, it'll split them into individual files. So for instance, you'll have your host config file and then your service config file, but that will be titled as your host. I don't know why I'm trying to explain that. I'm sorry, but essentially it makes it so XI can read them properly. So this is a really good tool for bringing in large swaths of configurations, importing right into the MySQL database of Nagios XI, so you don't have to manually add them in or run wizards against those systems, etc. Really briefly, this is kind of hidden way at the bottom of the Graph Explorer component in Nagios XI. It's the multi-stacked ability. So this allows you to select any host or service check in your environment that is returning performance data to Nagios XI and stack it up against another one. So for instance, let's say you want to stack all your bandwidth checks against one another to see where maybe one port's using more bandwidth than the other, and where we might need to implement limiting, checking your hard drives usage, where one might be using more than the other. Any metric that's reporting, you can stack up against another one. And as you can see here, just like with normal Graph Explorer, I can mouse over it, and I can see each individual metric here that we've got down below and take a look at their individual performance data values right on top of each other. So it's a really good tool for sort of comparing one host or service to another or multiple. Since we've just got, I think we're probably out of time, are we? Okay, we'll talk about this slide briefly here. Performance settings and tuning. This is under the admin menu under performance settings in Nagios XI. This is a great tool for kind of tuning down your system, getting a little bit leaner, so to speak. This will allow you to change things such as your database maintenance time. So when Nagios goes through and tries to fix crash tables for you automatically, it'll allow you to change the refresh rate of your individual dash. Let's say you've got multiple users logged in at once. We all know that can tax the XI system sometimes, especially if they're all running reports or viewing dashboards that are all refreshing individually. This will allow you to change some really granular refresh times for these different pages and kind of tune your system down a little bit. and make it a little bit, even a little bit more speedy in the long run. And then one more example here. You can also change, for instance, how long the NDO utils database retains historical data. So your max log entries age for Nagios XI, state history age, things that are used in your reports. So you can actually bump this out further if you're looking to retain more data for your Nagios XI reports. And you can also drop it down too if you don't really need all that extra data in there. And you just kind of want to lean out your system, remove some of that extra fluff that's in there. If any of you are interested, I think we're out of time now.
Well, we're in a time of questions now. Obviously, we want to give folks an opportunity to question or seek further clarification on the great information that you shared. So who might have a question?
Hi, I've never used XI. I've used Core for a number of years. Regarding the parent-child capability in XI, is it possible to configure XI so that if 2 or more children are unreachable behind a known parent, to create a specific alert on that?
So an alert on
say a switch goes down.
Yep.
And it's the only parent of some number of children. Not all my dozen children are down. It's the switch. Mm-hmm. So let's say even I can reach the switch, but I can't reach any of the children.
Okay.
Is there logic in XI to accommodate that?
Not specifically in XI. It still uses the same logic for parent and child relationships as Core does, because Core is running on the back end of XI. That one I'll have to take a look at a little bit more in depth. You can use something called the DPI, which is the Nagios Business Process Intelligence. He's nodding his head. He knows about it, which I think I've got later on in here. But it essentially allows you to break the change between hosts and services. So, your services are all under a host because they have to connect to that host and check it. This allows you to say, pull entire services out of one host and just check those services themselves and not have to connect them in like that. So you can kind of structure it as you've got set up in the real world. Or you can even do things like you're mentioning where you can check individual services or a group and services that are not related whatsoever to it at one time and get alerted for those. That's just a really basic use case for it. There's a lot more advanced things you can do with BPI. And I could probably actually show you here a little bit afterwards if I can remote in my system, if I can get a network connection. I know it's been a little bit troublesome for people today.
Other questions?
With the new backup feature that you
Go ahead. Let's keep moving back to it.
with the new backup feature that you was telling us about, does it also have a restore option?
Directly from backups, I don't believe it won't automatically restore.
Well, what I mean is with the backup module that you're showing us now, it shows you how to back up, and it's giving you the backup rotation and whatnot. But if you want to do a restore from a backup that was created here, can you do that here?
Okay, I see what you're saying.
Without having to go to the command line.
Yeah. So for instance, if you're setting up a new XI server and you back up one, for instance, can you go into that web interface and restore from a backup file that you put on the system?
Right.
Not currently. That is an excellent feature request, though. I'll mark that down here right afterwards. I think that has been brought up before. And this is, once again, a brand new feature that's been in production for, I think, maybe a month and a half now since we released 2014. But that's a really good feature. Thank you, Mr. Hankerson.
So you have the recurring downtime wizard. How about for non-recurring downtime? Like if you know your maintenance windows for the year, but they're not on the same day of the month. Is there something for that?
You could, if you wanted to plot out downtime in the future, you can definitely do that. You can do that with standard downtime as well. So you can select. I really wish I had the access to a Nagios XI server right now, so I could show you. But yeah, you can plot out the downtime in the future. There's a config file on the back end that, for instance, with recurring downtime, it's got just a big list of all the downtime periods and when they're going to start, valid days of the month, etc. And you can alter that yourself, and then have that brought into effect on the front end as well.
Okay, thanks.
I was just wondering if there was an easy way to get to a specific host group aside from having like the host group summary or overview, just especially when there's like 300, 400 host groups and you're waiting for them all to load up to even get to them.
Okay.
Other than going under core. Because I know you could pick on any host and you could drill down to the core and you could find it there and then you could just pick out of the groups that you have it set it up to. But aside from going through those multi-layers to get to it, is there any other way?
Like searching for the actual host group name in
Host
Nagios
group,
XI?
yep.
Yeah, that's...
And then to find all the hosts that are under it. Because like I said, the best way is to get through the core that way.
Yeah, that one I can't think of off the top of my head if there's another way to do that.
Yeah.
I know that we are, I've put in a few different requests for this. We're also altering the new search feature, I think, that's in Nagios XI 2014.
I couldn't find it, by the way. I looked.
Yeah, like I said last night, top right.
It wasn't there.
Is it not there?
I can show you right now if you want. But
yeah, after the talk, I'll take a look at it for you. Yeah.
You're welcome. Time for a couple of more here, I think.
So I got a simple one for you. Is the verify config, is that the same as the pre-flight script?
Yes, yeah, essentially, yeah. So the pre-flight check script, it essentially does the same thing. So another example of that would be the reconfigure script in Nagios XI. That's a way, essentially, of doing that from the back end in Nagios XI to verify the config files. Yeah, it's just going to essentially do the same thing. It's going to verify the actual config files that you're creating that are ready to be brought into the MySQL database. So you can see, for instance, if after you add a number of different services yourself in the CCM, as an example, you can run that tool and verify the ones that you've been working on and see where issues might be, see where there are errors, or even warnings. You can see where certain recommended options for your services are missing that you might want to build in or host. Or contact, or any config file that you're working on, essentially. Yes, yeah, it should be the same unless it's been altered in core file. I don't think it has. Yeah, you can run and reconfigure as well. Now that does touch the database. I had to look at that one again. It's been quite a while since I've used it manually, but I can take a look at that for you and let you know.
Last question right back here.
For the scheduled downtime, are there plans to make the scheduling a bit more robust so that, like, for example, I could schedule it for the third Sunday of the month every month, stuff like that?
So sorry, what you were asking about? I don't know of any plans currently. However, I'd be more than happy to put a feature request in for that for you.
Okay.
We've got an internal tracker for that as well as an external tracker, and I can put that. We're actually, after the conference, we're going to be reviewing all the feature requests that we have and all the bug fixes that people have put in or reports, and we're going to go through all that stuff. We've got a lot of time set aside for that, so I can throw one in there for you for that.
All right, well, that is the time that we have for this particular session. How about a nice round of applause for Sam Lansing?